If you ever feel out of control around food, you're not alone, and you're in the right place to learn practical, no-nonsense information about why you binge and how to stop. Binge eating does not mean that something is wrong with you. It's a natural but primitive brain response that you can correct. If you're ready for change, sign up for the Brain Over Binge self-paced online course for less than $20 per month. And if you feel you need personalized support, we also offer one-on-one coaching and group coaching. To learn more, go to brainoverbinge.com/subscribe. And I hope you enjoy the show. Welcome to the Brain Over Binge podcast, where you learn a simple, brain-based approach to ending binge eating. Today I have an interview which I'm very excited about. If you've read my second book, The Brain Over Binge Recovery Guide, you'll know that I had some amazing contributors who shared their own ideas and insights in that book. And one of those contributors was Katherine Thomson, who is a medical sociologist and who also works with people who have eating disorders. Katherine will tell you more about her own story in a little while, but she overcame binge eating and food obsessions, and now she's really passionate about helping people feel good about how they're eating and feel positive about their bodies and just really feel free of food struggles. So Katherine, it's so great to have you here today.
Oh, yeah. I'm really excited to talk with you and talk with your listeners. I'm really glad you're still doing this work.
Awesome. And Katherine and I have decided to focus on a topic today that we hope you really find very helpful and very practical. And I'm looking forward to this conversation. We're going to talk about the positive mindset that's necessary in recovery, especially for getting started in recovery and taking action to begin overcoming your food struggles. And I really love Katherine's perspective on this topic. She has some great ideas, which she'll share with you very soon. But first, Katherine, it would be great if you told the audience more about your background and your own recovery and the work you do to help others overcome eating issues as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So my background is in medical sociology, and that was my graduate work. My bachelor's degree was psychophysiology. And after my first job out of college was as a tobacco cessation counselor. And at that point, so this was the year between undergrad and graduate school, I already felt a deep commitment to helping people with addiction issues. At that point, I'd already suffered from eating disorder myself. And what I didn't realize, though, at the time was that I was going to have what wound up being a really, really big relapse when I went to graduate school. And I think it was in that process that I became committed at the lifelong level to helping other people get out of the pit of binging and purging, because despite all my background, my training, my career doing tobacco cessation, it still took me years to get better. And I think if I had had more support, better resources, it would have been a much quicker process. So professionally, I teach. I'm a professor. But I also usually mentor anywhere from like 3 to 5 people who have eating disorders, because I'm so grateful to be on the other side of that. And I want to help people who are still struggling.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love hearing how other people overcome this and then go on to help others. And I think it's amazing that you've made this lifelong commitment to reaching out and helping people overcome this. And from what you've talked about and from our conversations we've had in the past, it seems like your recovery involved building new, healthier habits over time, by taking consistent positive action, even though sometimes you probably didn't feel like it. And taking those consistent actions eventually brought you to freedom. And like you said, it took a long time for you. And like I mentioned in the beginning, we're going to be focusing on this positive mindset that you need to take those consistent actions in recovery and not revert back to old behaviors. I feel like this is a time of year when so many people have this renewed focus on change. And for people with eating disorders, it's like it brings a renewed focus on recovery as well. People listening might be making a lot of progress, and that's really wonderful. But other people may find themselves feeling stuck and like not making the progress that they want to make. So for those people who may not be feeling positive, who may be feeling confused or frustrated or stuck, or even feel like they're resisting doing what they need to do, can you just explain how it's important to foster that positive mindset and sort of just why that's really a key part of taking consistent action to get started in recovery and to keep going in recovery?
Yeah, great set of questions. And first of all, I just want to address your earlier comment about the importance of habits. And I think a lot of what I'm going to be talking about in this episode is really the importance of building, sustaining, honoring the power of habit. But in order to get yourself to go through the tedious, boring details of daily life, you really do need to have a sense of optimism and a hope, a belief in yourself. And so I think we hear this and we know this on some level. Yeah, think positive. Yeah, be optimistic, have hope, whatever. But it's helpful to think about why that's so necessary. And one of the reasons is just that when we are in a negative mindset, when our emotions are low, when our thinking is negative, we make bad decisions. And it's as simple as that. I mean, I could go on and talk about all the other reasons that a positive mindset's really necessary. But the biggest reason is because we're not going to make good decisions if we're thinking from our negative emotions. And people who know about brain chemistry know that when we get into a negative funk, our limbic system gets activated, the decision-making centers of our brain get suppressed. And what recovery is just a series of decisions that we make every day. That's what it boils down to. And so not only do we need the positivity just to keep committed and to keep in action, but the actual choices we're going to make if we're coming from a positive mindset are going to be higher level. And so I think that was one thing that I had to learn early on, was that when I was at my worst, and a lot of people are this way, I wanted to scrap the whole thing and try something new. I'd be on the computer. Okay, obviously nothing I'm doing is working right. How can I find the right way? And that's not what you want to do. The thing you want to do at that point is you want to, loosen the reins a little bit, slow down, take a break. And then when you're feeling calm again, then start to build up the renewed commitment to your set of actions and behaviors.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And again, kind of bringing it back to this time of year, people tend to set these black and white resolutions. And then when it doesn't work, instead of seeing maybe the progress that they've made and what is working, they say, oh, I'm just going to start all over with something new. I mean, so it's not about continuously starting over. It's about building on what you've done and keeping going from there.
Yes, it's so true. I mean, I see it in every area of being a teacher and a mentor. I see it with students where, we're looking at a part of their paper and they want to, they sit here with their laptop and I'm trying to stop them because they start to delete an entire section of their paper. And I'm like, no, don't do that. And I feel the same way as a coach. I feel like, no, don't change every item in your fridge and start over from zero. What was working for you before is going to work for you again in the future. But the truth is, in order to learn what works for you, you sometimes just bump up against the places in recovery where you slip a little bit. And you can't learn where those dangerous places are if you don't slip. So it doesn't mean you have to have a full relapse or, really start binging again or anything like that. But you won't know what does and doesn't work unless you actually put it into action.
That makes sense. And when you talk about action, I think that when it comes to these negative thought loops that people with eating disorders can get in, you can get in this negative place. And like you said, when you're in that place, it's easier to make bad decisions, decisions that don't line up with your goals. So you used this term in the past about acting your way into thinking instead of thinking your way into acting. Can you explain what this means and how someone could apply this strategy to sort of get out of that negative thought pattern?
Yes. So this is something that is fun to talk about because it's something where I'm still learning how to do this. I happen to be a thinker, I'm a planner, I'm a fantasizer, and many of us are, I think, especially in societies that are really focused on information as being tied up with our careers and so on and so forth. But the truth is that that's not where change comes from. I used to construct these elaborate plans, elaborate schedules with the best intentions when I was recovering from my eating disorder. And everything was laid out perfectly, and it was very realistic. I had my whole food system down, what I was going to do. I even planned a little break in the afternoon. And then the next day by 10 a.m., I wasn't following my schedule. And that happened to me for years. For years, I was trying to lead with my thinking modality instead of my doing modality. And so what they're finding more and more, and there are a lot of books on this. One of my favorites is called Mini Habits by Stephen Geis, is that behavior happens through action. And the actions taken consistently, time and time again, small actions, not only do they build up new behaviors, but they actually create optimism and they actually generate motivation. And so if somebody's not feeling motivated, a lot of times they want inspiration. They want motivation. I remember feeling this way all the time. Where's it going to come from? What new book can I download? What new piece of wisdom can I find? And all of that can be useful, but until you start taking constructive action, the motivation's going to hit a ceiling. It's the general building up of behaviors that creates energy, that creates momentum, and that helps a person's self-esteem. It's really gratifying. It was Aristotle who said that man is a goal-setting animal. The doing is very important to us, and the getting little things done over time, cumulatively, is what's going to get us to the next stage. And from there, we start thinking differently. We start thinking about ourselves differently. And it doesn't have to be extensive. Very small habit changes can really change the way we feel about ourselves.
I totally agree with that. I mean, it's important. I was like you. I would come up with all these plans, all these, things I was going to do differently. And I just didn't follow through. And it's about getting yourself to follow through and doing consistent positive things. So I'm wondering if you can delve into that more, how you get yourself to act, and maybe specifically talk about goal setting, which you just mentioned, and how you can create realistic goals for yourself, and maybe how you can reward yourself, or just different ways you can get yourself to go after these goals that are going to get you toward freedom.
Yeah. So the most important thing to do is to choose small little goals. I encourage people to try and choose about 3 or 4 goals for the next day, all of which can be achieved in about 5 minutes or less, each one. So we're talking about a total of 20 minutes time commitment, but things that you might not normally do. So things that are a good idea, but you just sometimes let it slip. You let it go under the radar. You want to focus on just 3 or 4 core behaviors that are very doable, that are short in duration, and then make a commitment that you are going to get all 3 or 4 of these done by sometime in the morning, and decide exactly what time in the morning. And what you'll find just from doing that, first of all, it's a lot harder than it sounds. So when you start to look at it, you're like, oh, this was such an easy little goal. One of my goals was I just wasn't going to push the snooze button when I woke up. And it turns out that when you're actually in that situation and you're trying to wake up and the alarm is going off and your habit is to push the snooze button, it actually takes a little bit of overcoming of inertia to resist that. So going through this process, setting a few small goals that you can achieve early in the day, it really helps you understand your own behaviors. What you're doing is you're setting yourself up to win, but you're also understanding why it is that it never worked before. Because you start to see that those 4 little things that you're trying to do before 10 a.m., actually, sometimes they're kind of hard to do. And so, wow, given this, no wonder I couldn't do a whole day's worth of elaborate actions that I planned for myself. So I recommend starting with just a few different goals that you set for the day and then rewarding yourself. There are lots of different ways people can reward themselves. I would say if somebody's recovering from a slip, you want to come up with a reward just for getting through 24 hours. Even if you don't think you're going to slip again, doesn't matter. 24 hours, come up with some sort of a reward for doing your 4 actions in the morning. I would say that's worth a reward in itself, but also you might give yourself another reward for getting through the day without having another slip. And these rewards don't have to be big. So I use physical rewards. What we know is that emotional part of our brain, the part of us that wants to push the snooze button, or the part of us that wants to binge, that part of us does not think long-term. Long-term reasoning is not going to do anything for that part of your brain. You have to have something tangible. You have to have something sort of visceral to motivate you through those hard times. And little tiny trinkets sometimes are enough. So like a new candle, a new pair of socks, something that delights you. It doesn't have to be something you really, really want. It just has to be something that's kind of pleasing, that brings you joy. And what you'll find over time is you'll start to learn what those things are. And you'll start to learn what rewards do work for you and what don't. And I also think that if you can afford a bigger reward, go there because it's worth it. Because once you can get 1 day and then 10 days and then 30 days, it's so worth it to give yourself a really nice, big, juicy carrot just to try and get over some of these hurdles.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's just like finding those things that work uniquely for you. Now, while you're talking about goals and these 4 things in the morning, I think that's a great way to start to just pick 4 things, and it gives you some confidence as you go through your day, and it starts making you realize that you can change your habits. What sort of things would you recommend? Someone who is kind of feeling overwhelmed and feeling like their eating behaviors are sort of out of control. What are some examples of 4 things someone could do?
Oh, yeah, great. So some things people could do are, well, one is I believe in having a reset meal, especially for people who are bingers and purgers. So come up with some kind of meal that is relatively easy to prepare, that is large, especially in volume, but also pretty calorically dense, ideally. And the tendency for somebody when they've had a slip is to not want to eat, is to say, oh, I can't believe I did this. I'm just going to eat so carefully for lunch or for, my next meal. But one really powerful thing to do is to intentionally, as one of your goals, prepare yourself this reset meal. And for me, my reset meal used to be a 3-egg vegetable cheese omelet with a bowl of oatmeal. And I would have it with a big mug of tea and with a big glass of water, because the binging, it expands your stomach and it messes up your blood sugar. And it really took a big meal like that to start get me on the right path again. So I think that's one. I think making your bed can be one. For people who, I was this way, not everyone is, but when I would get into the throes of having like a slip, my house would get really messy. And I know that's not the case for everybody, but I would say it's about more than 2/3 of people, have this sense of chaos that takes over. And so anything like setting the alarm for 5 minutes and cleaning for 5 minutes. But again, you want to keep these things manageable in time duration. And I just love that tip anyway, setting the kitchen timer for 5 minutes to do anything that you're putting off, anything that's causing disruption in your life, and then making yourself stop after 5 minutes. That's really important, because if you don't honor your own agreement with yourself to make this a small deal, you're going to lose trust in yourself. And so you really have to, if your goal is clean 5 minutes, end at 5 minutes, even if you feel like you can keep going. Other things would be, for me, and this is still something I do when I find myself getting off track, is I don't like to put a lot of focus on my food right now because I don't need to. And I just am so glad to be done with all of that. But one thing I do is I really do try and drink a minimum amount of water each day. And that really helps stabilize my blood sugar and keep me feeling full. And so, trying to get in 4, 6, or maybe even 8 cups of water by early afternoon can be something that doesn't take a lot of time, but can have a big, big impact on helping you get through those early stages. Going on a short walk, that can be a good one. Checking your mail. That's another thing I used to stop doing when I would have a relapse. I wouldn't open my mail, sometimes for a month. So anything that's kind of nagging at you that feels like chaos, putting just a little bit of time into taking care of some of those little things can make a big difference in how you feel about yourself.
Yeah, it's all very practical. I mean, it's just some concrete things you can do to get back in that positive mindset. And once you do those things, I mean, when I would clean my house after, several days of binging and I would get things back in order, it did reset me. It helped me feel, like I was ready to start again. And unfortunately, I didn't have the right tools and strategies, and I didn't really understand how to best help myself at the time. So I just kept falling back into that place. But once you do find the things that work and you're consistently practicing them, even if you do slip, you can reset yourself. You can get back in that positive mindset, learn from it, and keep going. I mean, once I learned what was useful to me and learning certain information about the brain, my recovery was pretty quick. I mean, it was quicker than a lot of people. And you seem to be the opposite in that yours took longer, and you had slips and you had times that you did fall back into it. And I would like you to maybe speak to that a bit, because some people read my story and they think, okay, I have to really stop this behavior fast. I need to end it tomorrow. And it doesn't happen that way for everyone. So for someone who feels overwhelmed in looking at overcoming it altogether, what sort of incremental goal can they set as far as maybe just reducing it at first?
Yeah. So this is always a tricky thing. And I remember what it was like to be on the other side of this type of a conversation, because I would have therapists say things like, well, you've been doing this for a long time, so be easy on yourself. It might take a long time to get better. What I can see and say now is that, first of all, there are people who recover and don't ever have another slip. That is a real phenomenon. It's not the majority at all. It's probably, I've met, I don't know how many, maybe 150 people with eating disorders in my life. And I would say I can think of like 5 or 10 people who would fit under that category. So that's not the norm, but it doesn't mean it's not a bad goal to set. I think that having the intention of never having another lapse again is really great. You should have that intention, but not that goal. Because if you think about it rationally, okay, how are you ever going to meet that goal? You won't know until you're on your deathbed that you've met that goal. All we can ever say is how long it's been since our last binge. And so when do you reward yourself? I could say that I was thinking I'm coming up on 15 years, I think it's been, since I've been better. So on some level, I could say, oh, well, I'm not really better until I make it 20. So I think it's really great to set goals that are shorter in time duration. I think 10 days is a really great number of days for a lot of people. I think 30, 6 months, those are all great durations to try and set. And one thing I did that I just found I just loved it, was that I set my goal to be that I was going to at least get to the frequency level of binges and purges that was under the diagnostic criteria that set by the psychiatric diagnostic manual at that time. And it was partly because I went for a psychiatric evaluation. And after this 90-minute long thing, their conclusion was, you have bulimia. And I was like, I know I have bulimia. That's why I came to you. I was trying to get more information about about what's going on and how to get better. But it made me realize that, wait, this is a label they're giving me. And I don't want this label. I want to be free with the behaviors, but what would it take to actually technically, by their standards and their rules, be free of the label? And right now, there's a new edition now compared to when I was going through this. But the most recent edition of the psychiatric, the DSM, it's called the psychiatric manual, is that if a person is binging once a week or more for 3 months or more, that's the threshold of what counts as bulimia. And so, if you're using that and you're being super literal about it, if you go 10 days, then you're not bulimic that month. You would still have an eating disorder, absolutely. And they would still, if you went in for a consultation, they would give you an eating disorder title of some kind or another. But I found that just great. I was so happy when I got below the frequency level. And I could just sort of say, yeah, I hate this label. I never wanted this label in the first place anyway. I don't need it anymore. It doesn't even apply to me. So I think that can be one really fun thing to do. And it also just kind of puts everything in perspective. And you realize all this really is a label to describe an addiction. And an addiction is nothing more than a habit that's caused by a bunch of different things. But, to start to identify with the word bulimia, I think there can be some really negative consequences to that. So trying to free yourself from that attachment, that label can be great in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I think it's empowering just to say, I still have this behavior that I don't like. I have this habit that I don't like, but I'm not bulimic, or I don't have binge eating disorder. Those labels can make you feel powerless. They can make you feel like you have some sort of disease or disorder. So that is a great initial goal to set. I love that.
Yeah. And it's really funny because I never used the word that bulimic to describe myself until after I was better. I was going to therapy right away. There was never a time where I wasn't trying to get better. But I would tell my therapist, I would say, yeah, or my dietitian or whoever I was talking to, yeah, I have a problem with binging and purging. And I just did not want to take on that label because I think it is limiting. I think it does make people feel powerless. Some people don't see it that way. And so if it makes people feel better, then that's great and go for it. And I definitely don't think people should be in denial or that people should be silent about what they're struggling with. But I like being free of labels.
And even if you do have that label, it doesn't mean you're stuck with it. It doesn't mean you can't overcome it. It doesn't mean you're diseased or disordered. You still can overcome it. This is something that can be changed with consistent positive action. And like you were saying before, the decisions that you make each day, they add up and they actually, like I talk about in my book, physically change your brain so that it doesn't show up. The urges don't come anymore. You can just eat normally and not binge and just kind of go on with your life.
Yeah, yeah. And it's just miraculous. That's part of the reason I do this work is I don't ever want to forget how great it is now. I don't ever want to take it for granted.
It's amazing because both you and I have experienced it. We know how wonderful it is just to not have this in your life anymore. We hope the same for everyone listening. One thing I would like to talk about in relation to the positive mindset is I think that weight is a big stumbling block to that. I think that people can try to have a positive mindset and then suddenly they weigh themselves or they look at themselves in the mirror and suddenly they're right back into that negative thought pattern. And it just seems a lot harder to take those positive actions when you feel bad about your weight. So I guess what suggestions could you give with someone who is struggling with those weight thoughts and negative self-esteem that's really interfering with developing the positive mindset?
This is such a big deal, such a big hurdle for so many people. I mean, I remember what that felt like. I remember actually being in a support group and telling the person next to me, I don't even want to take a shower because I don't want to be without my clothes. I don't want to touch my body at all. I mean, that's how bad I felt because I had stopped the purging, but I hadn't yet learned any skill. I was not learning helpful skills about how to get the overeating under control. And it was a drastic increase in weight from what I had been before, which was a little bit underweight. I went from being a little bit underweight to being at the higher end of average weight. It was a big increase for me at that time. But what I learned from talking to this very woman that I turned next to, I remember, and saying this, and then from also talking to a couple other people in the group at the time, was that everybody suggested doing something that changed their appearance. So making some sort of change in the kind of makeup they wore, in getting a different haircut, in starting to dress in a different way. And I took their advice with that. I got a haircut and I started wearing red lipstick and I had my hair a little darker and I was wearing different kinds of clothes and stuff. And that was so helpful for me because I guess for a couple different reasons. First of all, it just kind of distanced me from this evaluative judging part of my mind that kept judging myself and comparing myself to who I had been a year before, 2 years before. So it disrupted that sort of visual comparison because my hair everything about me was looking kind of different. And another thing it did, and I think this is kind of cool, is that while recovery itself is a lot of times, it's kind of like a daily ongoing sort of a process. It's usually not drastic or dramatic, but changing your appearance can be drastic and dramatic. And it can be sort of a statement to yourself that, okay, yeah, I obviously don't want to gain weight, or at least I'm assuming for the people who are of a healthy weight, that many of them do not want to be gaining weight. However, I'm a new person now. I'm an older person. I'm a more sophisticated person. I'm at a different stage of my life. And I'm going to do some things to kind of stake that, to sort of show I'm not that person I used to be. And I can be healthy and I can have a goal to be healthy. But making that's your line in the sand. That's your distinction. Like, I am somebody new. I'm in a new stage of life. And I think that can be so powerful. I would even encourage people, if they can, to extend it to their decor, how they're decorating their home. Rearrange your bedroom furniture. Choose a new genre of music and play it in the background, something that you like but that you're not that familiar with, and play it nonstop. I remember I did that. Just, this kind of like weird eclectic jazz stuff I was listening to for a while. And the details of what you do aren't that important and they're not permanent, but just this idea that you're putting yourself into a new state of consciousness and you're establishing a new identity. And doing something drastic can be really, really great. And it's funny because as time has gone on, I look much more like the person I've mostly looked like, which is having kind of longer hair, kind of lighter hair. But it was great for me to have that departure for that. It was about a year of my life where it was super important for me to look different when I looked in the mirror. And for other people, it was actually not wearing makeup anymore. There was one woman who said, oh, well, I completely stopped wearing makeup. And for me, that was really important because I associated makeup with the part of me that was always trying to be this, like, fit this cookie cutter idea of what prettiness is. And so everyone had their own thing, but that was a common theme, was that everybody found it kind of necessary to assert a new identity. I think that's important.
It's such a fresh idea. I'm not sure if I've ever heard it put in that way. I mean, I've heard people suggest to change your wardrobe, like just to buy clothes that fit and flatter you, but just that drastic change in appearance, I can imagine would be very helpful. I did not do that, but I can remember comparing myself because I looked the same, except for my weight was a lot more when I was binging. So I was constantly comparing myself to how I looked before when I was thinner. So that idea of drastically changing your appearance it's very empowering. It's interesting. And I can imagine that it shakes things up and just gets you in a different place mentally.
Yeah, it was great. It was great. And is, like I said, like as much as you can kind of shift your whole state of consciousness about it and make this about evolving, make this about getting to the next level of your life. And it does help so much when you look in the mirror because you're someone new. Well, I'm really thankful to the people who all shared their experiences during that time.
I can imagine that also changing your personal expression, like your music and things like that, could also help as well. I think that just to develop your sense of self a little more and I guess just not get stuck in the same patterns, just also gets your focus away from food and weight as well, like focusing on other things in your life, exploring new interests, changing things, just get your mind in a different place than always thinking about calories and weight and food. And
yes. I think it's really important. And here's another thing, which is kind of like, instead of thinking your way into acting, act your way into thinking, because I think developing personal expression can be so important and so valuable. But a lot of times there just isn't that motivation to do it. And it's sort of this cyclical thing where someone says, yeah, well, I mean, it would be nice if I had a new hobby or something, but I don't really want to do it. Sometimes you just kind of have to do it anyway, kind of like, fake it till you make it until something turns you on, until something kind of gives you a spark. And one thing that I used to do, very simple thing, I remember when I would get into this kind of low motivation, nothing else interests me. There's nothing I care about. All my thoughts are about food and my appearance, would be to just open up a catalog or a magazine, look at a page, any random page, and then say, okay, if I could be given any one thing on this page, what one thing would I want as a gift? And it was just this silly little game, but I would make myself do it because after I did that with like 5 different pages, I would start to kind of get excited again. It really did work for me. I would make myself, okay, anything on this page I can have, and then turn the page and say, and what do I like on this page? And then turn the page, and what do I like on this page? And what it did is it got me out of my head and helped me sort of see, well, what things do I like? What makes me happy? What might be fun to have in my life? Oh, actually, you're having a vacation. That might be kind of fun. Is that something that I could even plan in? Maybe I can't go to Hawaii, but maybe next weekend I can go on a day trip somewhere. And so it just starts to generate some ideas. And it takes that sort of, again, faking it until you making it attitude if you're not feeling inherently inspired to do something.
What gets stronger in our brains is the things we put attention on and put focus on and put emotion into. And by taking the attention, emotion, and focus away from food and finding other things to get excited about, your brain will build new pathways, build new habits, and weaken the old ones that were focused on food. Yes.
And I'm a big advocate of magazines for that reason. For people who might have sort of a negative relationship with fashion magazines, you can find a lot of really interesting special interest magazines these days. And they're portable, they're comforting, they can be very beautiful. And for me, it's something that I still do. I've learned a lot more about my interests. So yeah, it can be a good way to replace some of those unhealthy obsessions and start to build new ones.
Definitely. One thing I want to mention here is that a lot of people with eating disorders tend to be perfectionist, and they might feel like they're going to lose their standards. They want to be driven. They want to be focused. They want to accomplish goals. How would you speak to that? How can they turn that around or maybe use their perfectionism to be a positive thing in recovery instead of something that gets them in a negative cycle?
Right. So this is something that's kind of interesting because there have been a couple different articles that have come out in the last 5 years looking at people who have long-term recovery from bulimia. And what they find is that people with long-term recovery actually still have really high levels of perfectionism. And so that's it's one of the biggest correlates with people who have bulimia. Is it goes hand in hand with perfectionism. Not to say that everybody with bulimia does, but those traits are really highly correlated. And so what they found, though, is that as people recover, those qualities don't necessarily go away. And so I find this really interesting because I think what it shows, first of all, is that you can get better despite having these perfectionistic tendencies. And number two is it kind of brings up this question that you sort of mentioned, which is, well, how can that perfectionism be applied in a way that actually serves you instead of hurting you? And I think one thing is almost kind of cycling back to what I talked about earlier. If you can set very, very small goals, but be very meticulous about them, like really just focus on, trying to meet your 4 little goals for the morning and being sort of perfectionistic about maybe, tracking those on a chart on the wall or something like that. That's something a lot of people don't have access to, that kind of commitment to day after day after day, making sure that you check in with your little goals or what have you. And there's nothing, it's positive. It's not something that's going to hurt you. It doesn't take a big chunk of time out of your life. I guess another thing I would think about is trying to find hobbies that actually sort of support your perfectionistic side. So it might be too much of a leap, for instance, for some people to go straight into maybe improv, dancing or acting. Although if it's not, or if people are feeling courageous, I think that could be just a great thing to do to break out of all sorts of habits and patterns. But maybe there's some sort of an art form or activity that actually is designed for people who sort of have meticulous interest in detail and who like to follow things in a certain order. I think that when you look at those different studies that have been published, and I've gone back and I've actually looked at what metrics they've used and how they've assessed perfectionism and all these things, is they find that the problematic aspects of perfectionism mostly have to do with negative self-talk. And that's the problem. There are other aspects of perfectionism that can actually be used to help people try and meet goals. Perfectionism can sometimes help people be persistent. It can also have the opposite effect, though. People can get into this black and white mindset where if one thing goes wrong, they scrap the whole project. So that kind of perfectionism is probably not going to serve a person very well. But in any area of life, there's a book, I don't remember the author's name, but there's a book called Strength Finders. And it's all about, instead of trying to get everybody to be this well-rounded individual who has all these talents and interests, what if people really just took their tendencies the way they naturally are and tried to make the best use of their tendencies? I think we often judge ourselves for the ways in which we're extreme. And yet those ways in which we're extreme that's where our genius lies also. The things that hurt you are often also the very same traits that make you unique and stand out in a positive way. And what is the big irony is that if somebody becomes very perfectionistic about being a perfectionist and just starts to judge themselves about that, well, now you've got layers upon layers of sort of self-inhibition, when maybe there's just a really creative way to take advantage of some of your perfectionistic traits, but just be really aware of the negative self-talk and know that there's nothing positive that I've ever seen that comes out of habitual negative self-talk.
Yeah, it's like you use your strengths, but you also understand where you might get tripped up or what parts of your personality or just the way you are might kind of get in the way of anything you want to do in life, but also in recovery. So just that awareness, I think, is super helpful. And to not criticize yourself for being perfectionist. I remember thinking, oh, well, perfectionism leads to eating disorders. That's what I was taught. So therefore, I need to get rid of my perfectionism. Well, no, I just might need to rechannel it a little bit.
Mm-hmm. I think that I received similar messages when I was in my early stages of getting better. I had this idea that, okay, I have to completely stop having any concern about my weight, and I have to stop trying to get A's, and everything about me is wrong, obviously, because it's gotten me into this mess. And so I need to learn how to be like somebody else. And that's just not how it works. I think one thing people can do is, like you said, awareness about your own traits, but also having a lightheartedness about it. So if you can laugh at yourself I think that's great. So to be a perfectionist who laughs at themselves for being a perfectionist, I mean, there's a really good inroad, is if you can sort of hold all of it lightly and just know that we're all different. We have different strengths and interests and so forth.
Yeah, it makes sense. It just helps lighten things up a bit and just helps develop that positive mindset, which we've been talking about. And this is a good place to wrap up today. And this conversation has been so helpful and so practical. I love your ideas, and I really appreciate you coming on the show. And before we end, I'd like to ask, do you have any final thoughts? And then also, can you explain to the listeners how they could contact you or learn more about you?
Well, thanks, Katherine. I've really enjoyed this talk also. Hopefully it comes through how passionate I am about this subject and how excited I am to see all the positive changes that have come out in the field. In terms of contacting me, I currently don't have a website up, but I'm always happy to hear from people. And I do sometimes have openings in terms of coaching and mentoring. My email it's K-A-T dot Thomson without a P. So that's K-A-T dot THOMSON.PhD@gmail.com. And in terms of final wrap-up messages, one is just take care of yourself, because this is kind of like this motherly side of me coming through. You're going to have your body for many more decades, hopefully. And so do whatever you can to take care of your health and to minimize any kind of damage that could come from binging. And then also, it's really, really great on the other side. It really is. Everything that you think it's going to be, a lot of it, maybe not all of it, because there are still, of course, struggles that we all have, but it's easier than you think it's going to be. So keep going and be easy on yourself and set little goals so you don't get overwhelmed. And just also congratulations. You're in the minority of people who are really putting in this extra time to try and make positive changes in your life, and I know they'll pay off.
Thank you so much, Katherine. And to the listeners, I really hope you've benefited from this discussion, and I hope it helps you take some positive steps toward getting free of this habit. And I want to remind you that you can get my free ebook, The Brain Over Binge Basics, by clicking the link in the show notes. I truly appreciate you being here today, and I look forward to talking to you again soon. As we wrap up this episode, I want to encourage you and remind you that you have the power to change your brain and live a binge-free life. The Brain Over Binge podcast is produced and recorded by Brain Over Binge Recovery Coaching, LLC. All work is copyrighted by Brain Over Binge Recovery Coaching, LLC, and all rights are reserved. As a disclaimer, the hosts of the Brain Over Binge podcast are not professional counselors or licensed healthcare providers, and this podcast is not a substitute for medical advice or any form of professional therapy. Eating disorders can have serious health consequences, and you are strongly advised to seek medical attention for matters relating to your health. Please get help when you need it, and good luck on your journey. Need more help? You can find all of our current and upcoming options for support at brainoverbinge.com.